So far we have covered 2 out of the 3 descriptives that are used with respect to Torah. The first, that it is a Yerusha, a connection that comes to the individual by virtue of birth and at its core can never be severed. The second, Torah as a mechira, a process that involves effort on the part of the recipient, and in return the recipient receives something of value. In both cases, there needs to be a link between the giver and the receiver, without which there cannot be an exchange. We now come to the third descriptive used with respect to Torah, and that is the term MATTANA, a gift, which by definition something that is given willingly to someone else without payment. We call this a present. Applying the MATTANA concept to Torah, this would describe a stage in the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and mankind, given at the total discretion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In common parlance, as it relates to one's effort and energy expended in Limud HaTorah, this would be the highest stage of awareness, that of enlightenment. And in Hebrew, Itaruta de Le'ela. The word Itaruta is connected to the word Hitoreru, to awaken, de Le'ela, Aramaic for Oler, from above. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in an essay analyzing the differences between the Luchot Harishonot, the first set of Luchot, which were ultimately smashed by Moshe Rabbeinu on account of the Egel, and the Luchot Achronot, the ones that were ultimately placed into the Aron, that the Jewish mystics distinguished between 2 types of divine/human encounter. They called them Itaruta de Le'ela and Itaruta de Latata, respectively, an awakening from above and an awakening from below. As with the Luchot Harishonot, an awakening from above is spectacular, supernatural, an event that bursts through the chains of causality that at other times bind and limit the natural world. Itaruta de Latata, on the other hand, has no such grandeur, is a gesture that is human, in fact, all too human. The Itaruta de Latata is finite, whereas the Itaruta de Le'ela is infinite. Itaruta de Latata describes the efforts of man in his or her attempt to bond with the infinite, whereas Itaruta de Le'ela is the process by which HaKadosh Baruch Hu bonds with man. Matan Torah is the classic example of Itaruta de Le'ela. Itaruta de Latata comes about through the observance of Torah and mitzvot. The Itaruta de Le'ela is where God reciprocates with what we refer to as manifestations of Kedusha. Asher Kedushana b'mitzvotah is recited before one fulfills or performs a mitzvah. Apropos to Torah study, Limud HaTorah, Itaruta de Latata would be the Mechira Mecher descriptive that is applied to Torah, a give and take, the investment of energy in the study of Torah, and the return is knowledge. The Matana aspect, one that is totally independent of man and comes at the discretion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the Itaruta de Le'ela, and describes the state of Nevuah. At its lowest level, the ability to foretell the future. It also includes the conveying of information from HaKadosh Baruch using the physicality of a human being to convey that information. And this is the level, according to the thesis of the Rebbe, to which the term Goral applies. Itaruta de Le'ela is a Kabbalistic concept, and while majority of the population involved in Torah study tend to veer away from Kabbalistic material, the Rebbe, being well versed in all 4 sections of the Torah, maintained that there was no division between the Nistar and the Nigla, the hidden and the revealed. The most obvious example of the linking between the Nistar and the Nigla is the inclusion of somewhat unintelligible esoteric type statements that have been sprinkled throughout the Talmud Bavli. And 2 examples relating to the Matana aspect of Torah, the Itaruta de Le'ela, come from Talmud Bavli, Masechet Nedarim, Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, where the Gemara records Rav u'Shmuel, the Amri Tarvai, both Rav and Shmuel were in agreement regarding the following concept, that Chamishin Sha'arei Bina Nivru Ba'olam, there is a total of 50 gates, 50 levels of Bina, of knowledge. Bina is also the Kabbalistic term of the second of the 10 Sfirot. V'kulam itnu l'Moshe chaser achat. Moshe had access to all 50 minus 1. He reached the highest level of knowledge and awareness of godliness that any human was able to reach. He was able to enter the 49th level of Bina. The 50th gate involved the infinite levels of Kedusha. This could only come through the Itaruta del Eilah, and coincidentally, this concept might relate to the period of Spirit HaOmer, the 49 days, after which the 50th day is Zman Matan Torah. The Gemara provides a textual source for this Kabbalistic concept, drawn from Tehillim 8:6, Vatchasrehu mi'at me'elokim, to which I shall return to in the next panel. On the same page of Gemara, in the Darim 35 Amud Bet, we have a most puzzled statement attributed to Rabbi Yochanan. Once again, Kabbalistic ideas that found their way into the Gemara text. Rabbi Yochanan observes, Batchila, Haya Moshe Lomed Torah, here referring to the 40 days that Moshe was upon Har Sinai, which ostensibly one can ask if he went there to receive the Luchot. That should not take 40 days, and for which the suggestion is that during this time Moshe studied Torah with HaKadosh Baruch. However, Umashkacha, whatever Torah he learned was very soon forgotten. Once again, in our next panel, we'll take a closer look at this statement, but at face value what we have here is Moshe Rabbeinu studying from God and forgetting all that he had learned.
Until such time that
Shenitna lo b'matana, the Torah was given to him as a matana. And here the Gemara references the pasuk from Shmot 31:18, the pasuk that informs us that Kechaloto ledaber ito, after God had concluded speaking with him, the Har Sinai, on Har Sinai, possibly referring to the 40 days during which Moshe studied Torah with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayiten el Moshe shtei luchot ha'edut. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the matana, the 2 luchot ha'edut, to Moshe Rabbeinu. Obviously, the statement by Rabbi Yochanan begs for some clarification. For those familiar with Kabbalistic terminology, what we have here is firstly an itaruta dilatata, where Moshe is able to penetrate the 49 levels of Bina, Torah understanding, but was not able to penetrate the 50th level, the infinite level. For this could only come to him at God's discretion, via Matana, the Itaruta de Eilah. Similarly, this model can be transferred to all who sincerely involve themselves with Limit HaTorah, that at the discretion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they might receive the highest level of Kedusha, that reflected in the concept of Torah as Matana.